Thanks.
Hi, everyone. I'm so sorry for the delay, but we are live now with one half of Emma Carrick to start. The other half will be here momentarily, and Andrea Stewart, and they will be answering your questions. And since we started a little late, I'm going to let them go ahead and start answering.
Okay,
and then
so
we'll
I
bring
think
Emma Carrick on the screen when they get here.
so I think I had answered that question already about the magic system and how I design it. Marie, did you want to go ahead and answer that question as well?
Give me just 1 second here. Sorry, I'm trying to juggle a couple of things. Anyway, sorry. Yes. Oh, I just heard a cat. I'm going to be so distracted by everybody's cats. Seriously, I apologize. Cats are my kryptonite, so if a cat comes in view on camera, I lose the entire thread of what I was saying. So yes, with the systems of magic, I have done both of the existing cultures and traditions and the, making something up. And it depends on the story. For this one, there is definitely both of them are kind of going on because we've got multiple kinds of magic in our setting. Imbuing is something where it's just an idea I've had in my head for a long time of magic that really all it does is it makes stuff work better, that whatever a thing is meant to do, you can enhance that so it starts moving into a supernatural level of like, this sword will never rust and it can cut through things a sword shouldn't cut through, that kind of thing. Whereas then with pattern, that's something where we knew going into this that we wanted some kind of fortune-telling divinatory card deck, but we knew that we didn't want it to be just, tarot with new names slapped on top of it. And so that was something where I had to kind of think about it from the start and go, okay, what is the structure of this deck going to be? What are the underlying kind of cosmological principles of it? And why does it, work the way that it does? And so that was certainly being influenced in some ways by real card decks. Those were feeding in, but it's not built on the exact base of anything. Ellis, we're answering the magic question out loud now, and I figured I figured you might want to talk about numinatria and the sort of roots that has in the real world sacred geometry, numerology kind of stuff.
Yes, I will talk about that. Sorry, I was trying to set up the emergency Zoom meeting on my work laptop, so I was like going back and forth between the two. Numinatria, yes, sacred geometry, math stuff. Getting myself together. What is the question?
Drawing on real world stuff for inspiration versus making it up.
Yes. So numinatria is very much draws from sacred geometry and also just in general, I have kind of a love of very kind of ritual style magic. I think that some of that comes from a very Catholic early upbringing, and some of it comes from early love of Catherine Kurtz's Durini novels, which are very much kind of embedded in this very ecclesiastical style, high Latin ritual magic kind of stuff. And so with numinatria, because Marie had kind of taken point on developing pattern, I offered to take point on numinatria, and also because Vargo was kind of more in my wheelhouse, so it made sense for me to know what the magic he was doing, because he's the main inscriptor, which is the person who, the name, what we call people who do numinatria style magic. So Marie loaned me this book that she had.
This is past tense. I don't have it anymore.
I keep saying I'm going to return it, but obviously I haven't yet. But yeah, she loaned me this book that's it's got the longest title in creation, A Beginner's Guide to Constructing the Universe. I don't have the entire title written down. Sorry. Anyway, so that's the main title, A Beginner's Guide to Constructing the Universe by Michael S. Schneider. And it's a great book that kind of breaks down numbers 0 through 9 or 0 through 10 in kind of mathematics and their meaning and use in mathematics and geometry, but then also in the natural world and Marie will agree that hexagons are the bestagons.
There's a video about this.
There's a video about hexagons that are, where it appears in nature and all these other places. And so that was kind of where I drew that on, and it fit very well with the way we were developing the Leganti, which is the culture that this kind of uses this kind of magic, with how structured they are, how rational, how kind of dedicated to a sort of rational relationship with the divine, because Numenatria is a divine kind of magic. It draws from the power of their godhead, the lumen, but in a very rational, logical way rather than an emotional or intuitive way, which makes it a nice contrast for pattern and the Versennian magic, which is very much a dream magic and intuition and divinatory.
I can't remember if we're supposed to be the ones picking out our questions here. I think
we
are.
Yeah, we can take turns.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So I'll just go down from the top since those ones have the most votes.
Yeah, remember everybody, you can upvote things in the Ask a Question thing, and that way we know which ones lots of people want to hear about, because we probably will not get through all of these.
So the next one is for both. What kind of research do you do, and how long do you spend researching before beginning a book? Okay. Do you want to answer that first, and then we can just go back and forth?
Sure. The research, it depends on the type of book. Like when it was the Onyx Court series that I was writing, those are set in, historical England, and oh my God, it was my home PhD in English history. I did a lot of research, probably a couple of months worth at least, for every one of those books before I started writing. Whereas for things that aren't set in history, like The Mask of Mirrors, it tends to be more spot research. Like we knew that we wanted to have stuff with like gangs and con artists and things like that. And so I went and read some books about historical gangs, and there's a book that I will dig out the title for and drop into chat in a moment when I'm not talking, that was basically about the psychological techniques that you can use to persuade people and frankly manipulate them. Basically the tactics that like salespeople use on you and such. And so I went and read through that and took notes on like, okay, here's how Ren is going to manipulate everybody. So it's more spot like focus research. Because for the world building, for me, that tends in this kind of story to be more it's just the entire compost heap of nonfiction that I have read over decades, that's what the things are springing out of.
I was going to say, kind of the same. I tend to read about what I love and then write about what I've read about because I love it. And so things like Marie and I will talk about the places where we overlap and then also the places where we differ. So for example, she's the big language nerd among us. And so a lot of the kind of interesting things that are happening with language in the book are things that she has taken charge on. And I'm the big economics nerd between us.
Yes.
And so a lot of the kind of nitty-gritty details of like the economic and to some extent the political system and how they interrelate are based on things that I have read in the past. But yeah, for the most part, in writing this, there was spot research that was done, but a lot of it was just based on things that I'd already read about, or just spot research, kind of checking up on things that I already kind of had a good idea on. Yeah.
Yeah, so for me, a lot of it is that kind of spot research that you're talking about. It's like I'll run across something, for example, with the bone shard magic. I knew that I wanted them to be removing a piece of bone from the citizens and using that in their magic. And then I was thinking, well, what would be the best part of bone to remove? So I started, asking around about that, which is like a little bit kind of a strange question to be asking people. Then I found out about trepanning. I don't know how it's pronounced actually, because I just read all this stuff.
Yep.
And then I was like, oh, well, that would be a convenient way for them to get a shard of bone, and also it just is kind of like gross and cool. So I do a lot of that kind of spot research. Also, before I write a book, I'll usually have an idea of like what the setting is going to be. So in this case, I knew it was going to be an archipelago of islands. So I would just go and do some reading about like island nations and, what kind of food they eat, like things like that. Like just kind of like I would check out like a lot of like travel books and stuff too, just to, because I feel like those have like kind of a little good overview of like history and like the feel of a place and how the people live a little bit. So I usually do like a lot of reading like that before I start working on something new. But most of it I kind of make up.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's funny because like what I'm doing structural edits right now on the second book, and I've noticed that a lot of my research now is like going back and figuring out like what I had done in the first book. And trying to remember like all of the world building details. I started like my own like little like wiki, so
we've got a wiki,
so I can refer back to that because I'm like, oh gosh, what was that person's name again, or like what was I thinking the background of this was again? So
yeah, sometimes your research reading is your own book.
You're just self-referencing at that point. Yeah.
Yeah, what you said about reading about island nations and what do they eat and such. One of the bits of spot research I did was on like pre-modern Chinese cuisine, because we're like, well, here's the latitudes that Vrasan occupies, and it's a big river valley, so we decided they had a rice-based kind of foodways. And so, okay, time for me to go read books on, pre-modern Chinese food so that I can think about how that's going to work. You don't always know that you're going to need these things until you're halfway through the book and then go, oh, let's pause briefly.
And then you have to go back and put that information back in.
Right. Let's see, I think, there we go, it popped away. So our next one, this one's for me and Alyssa, asking, how is the writing process with two people? How do you work together to create a single cohesive manuscript? So people who have listened to other interviews may be tired of hearing me rattle this off, but the hopefully not too long version is, this grew out of a role-playing game. And so Ren is actually my PC, which feels embarrassing to admit, but it's true. And the reason that we wound up writing the way that we did has to do with the fact that it came out of a game, because we had been writing these side scenes for things that really just involved my character and some NPCs whose names were Gray and Fargo. And when we wrote those scenes, because it was like a role-playing game, because it was related to this, we wrote it kind of the way that you play a game, which is to say that I had control of Ren and Alyssa had control of the NPCs, and we sort of swapped off on descriptive stuff. And we're doing all of this in a Google Doc where we would just be kind of coordinating in chat and saying like, tag, or sometimes, wait, I don't quite get what that character's referring to. Oh, let me rephrase, or, ooh, can I change that slightly because it'll set up this other thing? And that's the way we write the novel. We're working in a Google Doc, and we're trading off just constantly through the course of writing most of the scenes. It's rare for one of us to go off and write a scene entirely by ourselves. And so creating a single cohesive manuscript, it's that we are coordinating as we go along and saying, okay, we know what beats we need to hit here. Oh, wait, no, hold on. Let me drop this thing in, and that'll help steer it toward that thing that we need the characters to bring up. And then both of us edit it repeatedly along the way. So honestly, at this point, we can point to a few individual lines, and like I can say, yeah, I know Alyssa wrote that one because I remember when I read it and went, oh, yeah, that's good. Okay. But we can't find the seams between it. I just saw the question in chat, does this make this novel published fan fiction? Yeah, kinda. I mean, yeah. Yeah, so I mean, that's the way that we do it, is that we honestly run it kind of like a written role-playing game, only with a lot more planning of where it's going to go. It's less improv than it was in the game version, because we're allowed in the game scenes to kind of faff about for thousands of words, being like, yeah, theoretically they're like breaking into a prison here, but really they're just kind of having banter.
Yeah,
in the novel,
it's got to be a little... Because I actually think, as much as, we had about 50,000 words of the game fic before we decided to write something together, and then it actually took us an embarrassingly long amount of time to decide that the thing we were going to write together was the game story that we had been telling. But I don't think, other than like a couple snippets from some of those things and like one or two really, really condensed versions of the scenes. Most of that didn't actually make it into the novel. It's the ideas and the characters and the character relationships that are what the novel is based around. But we didn't actually end up using a lot of that. Most of that content is actually book 2 stuff anyways.
There is one book 2 scene that is almost verbatim what I wrote for the game. It's a ridiculous piece of fluff, but most of it we did rework.
It's so cute.
Because, I mean, we completely reworked the setting and the plot of what was going on in the game because we wanted to take the characters and relationships and the arc of that and pull that out and then build, people have heard me call it, we had an invertebrate novel for a while because we had all this meat and no skeleton to hold it together. So we had to come up with, a different setting for it to take place in and a different plot to justify the kinds of interactions we wanted to have.
So did you two outline it? Just curious.
We had to outline a lot more than either of us normally does because my usual feeling of I have this vague, evolving, nebulous cloud of story in my head doesn't work because Alyssa can't see the inside of my skull.
Yet.
So
interpretation maybe would help with that.
There we go. So yes, we have to do a lot more planning and coordination than we do individually because there are 2 people involved.
Yeah. And we do sometimes, as much as a lot of this is written on a Google Doc over chat, there are times, especially for big climax moments or big kind of adventure-y, complicated moments, I will go over to Marie's and we will sit on, she'll sit on her futon and I'll sit on her couch and we'll just be both there on our laptops and discussing it back and forth because it's so much easier to talk about it when we're in person than it is to try to do that over chat.
Yeah.
So the next question is also for you two. So, and it kind of is related to the last one. Who created each character? So do both of you do it or did you each come up with some?
So, I don't know if Alyssa wants to go first here. I tend to be the one who leaps in.
I was going to say, so it is to some extent, especially in the kind of first iteration, the game iteration, Ren was Bryn's PC and all the other characters were mine. And I think you had suggested that Ren having a character like a sister like Tess. But
that she would need somebody to help with the con.
She would need somebody to help with the con. But then, so I created Tess, and kind of the reason that she's Irish is because that's one of the few bad accents that I can do. And so when you're playing in a game, I'll do my very bad Irish accent when I'm running scenes with Bryn. And so part of the interesting thing was when we were taking these out and doing them for the novel version is suddenly we were like, we had this kind of Latinate name for Renata Viradux and this kind of Eastern European name for Arenza Lenskaya. And then we had Tess the Irish woman. And so we she couldn't not be Irish because she was like there in our heads.
It was too fixed,
and so we had to kind of massage this whole thing about where and how we could have this Ireland kind of pseudo.
And then for some reason we named it with a Welsh name, but don't ask about that. We're not entirely consistent. But the entire reason Gothic exists is because Tess needed to be from some other place that could have a different accent.
But then Vargo and Gray originally were NPCs that I had kind of thought of as foils for each other in a lot of ways, and were models for different choices that Ren could make. And when we as we started developing them and the relationships between them, they also grew and kind of became much more complicated and interesting. Yeah.
All right. So for the next one, definitely Andrea should go first here.
Yes.
When writing, do you tend to think of broader themes to explore first, or do you work out from smaller characters and character moments?
Shoot, that's tough because I feel like when you start writing, it starts from one maybe seed of an idea, and then it kind of just branches out, and it's hard to say exactly what came first. I know for mine, definitely the idea came first. If you've read any of my interviews or anything. Like, it's one of my friends was out to lunch with a bunch of them, and she almost choked on a piece of bone, and I was like, oh, what if I used bones in magic? So it kind of like grew out from there. But I think for that one, I was thinking a lot about some of the broader themes in the beginning, before I really kind of nailed down the characters. And I think for me, part of that is knowing how the characters were going to represent those themes, and how they're going to address it. So when I started writing it, like I had the characters as kind of very loose and not really knowing exactly who they were as people. And then it was when I was thinking about what themes I wanted to address, that's when I started really deepening those characters.
Yeah, and I think from the things that we've already said, it's probably pretty clear that in the case of this particular novel, we really did start with the characters. Like, we pulled them out of one story and then made another story to stick them into. I think that in general, I would say that I don't go theme first. And actually, usually the way I hear this question being asked is, do you start with a character or with a plot? And I say, I reject your false dichotomy. I start with a world. And I think there's a lot of truth to that, because I mean, both Alyssa and I are coming out of an anthropology background. And so for me, both character and plot are so inextricably linked with the setting that they exist in, that I can't separate them out from it. The setting is one of the things I love most about fantasy. And so that often is kind of where I will be starting, is with some element of that.
Okay.
Next one.
Question.
This is a spectacular question that we're still trying to answer. How do you balance political intrigue with the demands of character and plot? Andrea, go ahead. I think you were actually getting the honest answer right there.
Yeah, that's funny, because that's like part of what I am like kind of shuffling some things around for structural edits, where I'm like, well, I need to kind of increase the tension here, and maybe like the political intrigue isn't quite doing it, so I need to like add some like action. So I don't know. I think like for that, it's kind of one of those things where you just write it as you feel like it should be, and then you read it and you realize it's not as it should be, and then you go back and you fix it so it is as it should be. For me, it's like mostly a feeling, like I'm reading it and I'm like, am I bored? Am I feeling like something is dropping off the map here? Part of that I try to do in an outline, like I know some people color code their outlines, where they're like, oh, this is like this kind of scene, and they'll make it like in green, and then they'll say, oh, this is like, a political intrigue scene, they'll make that in blue, and then they can kind of see like if something is dropping off, or if they're not hitting those certain beats that they need to. But yeah, for me, it's constant work in progress, really.
Yeah.
I think for us, it comes down to whenever we're writing a scene. It's funny, Andrea, what you were saying about, am I getting bored? Because I remember I had a piece of writing advice that I got from Siobhan Carroll, who sometimes writes as Von Carr, who we were all in grad school together in a writing group together. I can't even remember what it was, but I was basically talking about how I was writing something and I had to write this scene, and I was just like so not looking forward to it. And she said, are you not looking forward to it because it's complicated, or are you not looking forward to it because it's boring? And I was like, more because it's boring. She's like, then why do you need it?
Yeah.
I was like, oh, wow, that's so freeing.
If the author is bored.
Yeah. But I thought it was a step I had to show, and she was like, no, don't bother with it then. And I think, so for us, when we're writing, it often comes down to the balance is we look at every scene and we're like, all right, what is this scene doing? And what else can it do? And and look, making every scene pull not just one thing, but 2 or 3 or even 4 things. So it's like character development and relationship development and action and plot, and how much can we make this scene do multiple things? And I think if you can really force every scene that you have to be pulling multiple things, then you have to balance less because it's carrying more weight.
And the two other things that come to mind for me, one, there's a scene in our second book, which we just finished revising, that our editor went in and like cut several paragraphs from this particular scene, because what it amounted to was we were kind of, showing the political math on it.
Yeah.
And I think by that point in the second book, it's like the readers will just kind of go with you that there is good political math here. The character's been established as being astute. You don't have to show them why this is a smart move for them to make. And then the other thing, and this I think is actually where some of that research I did for the Onyx Court stuff comes in. Fundamentally, I look at even our fairly complex and intricate intrigue and go, compared to real life, this is simple. Like, there are so few players on the board here. There should be like 4 times as many people that we are mentioning doing things, but you can't do that, right? There's a point at which the reader is going to be completely lost because there are too many people being dragged into it. And so you do have to kind of balance it out and say, okay, how do I make this complex enough that the reader is going to buy it as realistic, that it's not just 2 people doing stuff that doesn't involve anybody else, without drowning them in, so the following 60 people have all stuck their oar into it.
There's a reason we only borrow from the War of the Roses rather than telling it verbatim.
Yeah. Yeah, like our city should have way more nobles being involved in stuff directly, but you would end up lost, and so would we, frankly, so...
You can't make it exactly like real life, because real life
Nope.
is sometimes a little bit too complicated.
And also too unrealistic, thank you very
Yes,
much.
yes.
Yeah, real history is full of crap that you cannot get away with in a book.
Okay, so the next question. Oh, this is a good one. Can you tell us about a time when you wrote yourself into a corner?
Yeah. I'm trying to think how to say this without spoilers, because that's obviously, a little bit difficult.
There was there's a thing.
Yeah, so that's what I'm thinking exactly.
Okay.
There's a bit in the middle of The Mask of Mirrors, for people who have read it, where we had Ren's interacting with some people who don't know who she is, and we had her give a name to them, which name? She has lots, she could choose. And we wrote this, and we wrote stuff after it, and it was fine. And I think it was when we were in revisions that we looked at one scene and we went, shit. If she gives her name to this person, then that person over there will have heard it. And if that person over there has heard it, then when we're in their point of view, it will be blatantly obvious that they're connected to this other thing, because we have multiple characters with multiple identities hiding secrets. And we're like, we are lying with our point of view right here, because that person should remember that name and recognize it, and they should think about that. And we really need them not to do that.
and like the way Marie is explaining it is how we ended up understanding the problem.
Yeah.
Because the answer was to have her not give that name.
Right.
But when we discovered the problem, we hadn't actually found the source of it yet. And so we were just like, oh crap, this person knows about this and so much is predicated on it. How do we fix this? And it took a while to kind of track down that the solution was for Ren not to have given that particular name at that particular moment.
Yeah. If you visualize, like, we've got hold of the thread and we're doing that thing where you follow it, and you're like, okay, it goes under this, and then wait, does it come out there? No, it comes out over there. Okay. And yeah, ultimately it was a simple fix of we just have her not give her name there. It meant that we lost a line out of a scene that we really, really loved, but that darling had to get the axe in order to not just make our plot fall apart.
So for me, writing myself into a corner. So frankly, I kind of do that constantly. One of the things that I try to do is during the course of the story is make things worse for my characters constantly. So sometimes I'll be like, okay, well, the character's going to have this plan, and that plan is just going to go completely awry, and it's just going to get them into this terrible mess, but then they have to figure out how to get out of that mess. but I don't necessarily know how they're going to get out of that mess.
Yeah. I might have said on Twitter my next book is going to have a stupid protagonist because I'm tired of having to be smart enough to solve my own plots.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think the saving grace is that we have a lot longer to do it. So sometimes I'll sit and puzzle over something for a day or two. Obviously, I'll continue writing past that point. I'll just have a solve this problem here kind of thing.
Yeah. and we have the ability to go back and change reality around the character and say, well, what if this happened earlier? There we go.
Right. Or I can consult with somebody and be like, hey, so I got this problem and I can't figure it out, but maybe you can.
Which I will say briefly, for role-playing games, when somebody's playing a character with superhuman levels of intelligence, the way that I've handled that is I allow the player to basically outsource their character's thinking and sort of group think with the other players of exactly. Yeah. Because it seems better than me as the GM just sort of handing them the answer and then they hand it back to me. That's boring.
Yeah.
So lifeline, call a friend.
But yeah, so that's, I have written myself into a corner very recently in book 2. So I can't reveal exactly what that was about, but I was going around and talking to everybody I knew, trying to figure out how do I fix this problem? Because I'm well, this needs to happen over here. And this also needs to happen, but how do I make it make sense?
I think one of the nice things about the collaboration between Marie and myself is that I am usually the person that she would go to when she would have a corner that she wrote to herself in other books. Yeah. And so the nice thing about this is that because we're both very invested in and aware of and familiar with the narrative, we can kind of sort of see the corners ahead of ourselves because we're kind of always checking in with each other, and we already have that kind of help me out of this corner dynamic.
Yeah That's kind of how we knew a collaboration would work, because we already knew that we thought along similar lines. Let's see. Checking the questions here. Here's one for Andrea. How did you decide to include both first and third person perspectives? Was there something that prompted it from a writing standpoint, or shall it have an impact on the later story? I'm going ahead and say we should answer that, or you should answer that one next, because I want to know the answer too.
Okay, so my first, I was thinking I wanted to really write something in first person. I really enjoy first person. And then I had this idea that I still want to write, multiple POVs. So structurally, I kind of broke it down where Lynn and Jovis are your main characters. So I wanted to get that really deep kind of perspective on them. So I put them both on first person. And you'll see in the next book, obviously they interact a lot more. And then everybody else is kind of third person, where they're a little bit more peripheral. They're not the main characters. And I do keep the same POV characters throughout the trilogy. So it was kind of in a way, I wanted to have my cake and eat it too. So I also enjoy writing in third person. I'm how can I make this happen? So I think you'll see a little bit more in the second and third book that there is kind of a reason for that, especially with how Lynn and Jovis are interacting. So I'll leave it at that.
All right. When researching one thing, do you come across another that causes you to think, oh, wow, I need to use that someday? And then how do you make a note or something to remember it? I would love somebody to give me a better solution to this problem than the one that I have. Because basically, I have random notebooks and files on my computer where I'll write stuff down, and then maybe years later I come across it and go, oh, right, that thing. I can't say I'm more organized about it than that. I don't know if either of you are.
That's a no.
I mean, the closest I come to organized, because I do all my writing by hand. Except when I'm writing with Marie and I have to write in a Google Doc. But even then, sometimes I'll go off and write by hand. And so I've just constantly got a notebook on me that I'm jotting things down, and I have lots of files with like one line of a story idea, and I try to develop it a little bit further than that, because if I go back 2 years later, I will have no idea what that idea was about. I won't even remember having had that idea. But in things that have gone past the one line idea, I'll usually have a section of my document that is just like tidbits and notes and like partial bits of outline and things, a line or two of conversation or anything like that I'm all transcribing from my notebook, much of which will never get used. But at least I have it there to see at the end of my document and kind of help inspire me.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it is just the compost heap metaphor I mentioned before. Though it has been interesting. I had a project at one point that I should get back to, of reading back through old notebooks and finding what's scribbled down there.
Wow.
Things that are story ideas like that, I have a more organized thing around, but it's more the like, here's a random cultural tidbit that's really cool. I should do something with that someday. Some of them will just get, shoved into whatever I'm writing right now if they'll fit. Like, my husband at one point linked me to a gorgeous photo of Iguazu Falls in South America, where it's a shot of a spot where there's basically like an island sticking out of the cliff in the middle of the waterfall. And I'm like, that's going in Tropic of Serpents. I have no idea what I'm going to do with it, but it looks cool. It's going in the book. And then I invented plot to make it work.
Yeah, I mean, usually when I run across something interesting when I'm doing research, I just end up doing a deep dive on it and then like hoping it comes up again later.
We've got one fairly brief, probably, question here for Alyssa saying, so far the Numenatria seems to be very two-dimensional. Would it work with three-dimensionality, such as with platonic solids and other geometric forms?
Yes, and I think that we have some three-dimensionality stuff, and possibly even four-dimensionality stuff in the second book, because tricot has to do with time. So yes, the answer is yes. I think actually technically, although I don't know if the visual really conveyed this, but technically there's a particular ritual that Tonnequist does in the first book that is three-dimensional. It's not just
flat,
the
wires in the
wires in
thing.
in the tricot thing, because again, tricot 3 plane or 3 points
dimensions.
So, dimensions. Thank you.
There's two questions that seem linked here for Andrea. One saying, what fun stuff can you reveal about Book 2, The Bone Shard Emperor? And then, are there any additional character perspectives we'll see in Book 2?
Okay, so I kind of answered already. It's the same character POVs in Book 2. Book 3 I think I'm planning on having like a very brief, like one chapter from a different character, but for Book 2, it's just the same. What fun stuff can you reveal about Book 2? Oh boy. I can reveal that there is, because I did a reading for the Scottish Book Festival. Yep. So I can reveal that there is a scene with Lynn and Jovis fighting off assassins that gets a little awkward. So I can reveal that. Yeah, I think maybe keep everything else under wraps for now.
Yeah, it's hard to talk about future books, especially when, for us, the first book hasn't been out very long. So yeah. Got a question. Are there any scenes you can tell us about that were cut from the final drafts? I think we only really cut one scene from The Mask of Mirrors. That only one thing that got cut in its entirety. There was basically a scene where
right, the Palestra.
Palestra, yeah. Ren basically went to the Palestra Gardens, which is sort of a gymnasium-ish dueling ground. People go there to kind of socialize and practice swordsmanship and such. We might actually post it to our website as like a freebie. It was something that wasn't pulling enough plot weight, which is why it got cut. And we're just sorry to see it go, because it showed Isabel Yap being kind of, catty in some interesting ways, and it showed Rivchek smacking her down with some nice fencing, and so we regret losing those little touches, but ultimately we wanted to have kind of a quiet moment, but it was too quiet. It was just kind of
too quiet, too late in the book, I think.
Yeah.
And again, it got to that thing I was saying earlier about a scene has to like be able to pull like 5 or 6 things.
Yeah, it was only pulling like 2, and that's not enough.
there are a couple scenes in the second book that we had to cut that we're going to either post them or find a way to incorporate them later.
Yeah.
2 in particular that are amazing.
Some of it's going off into book 3 instead, so it's not gone forever, it's just gone for now. How about you, Andrea?
So for me, the stuff that I cut is gone forever. Very ruthless about that. So I got very fortunate with book 1 in that it came out mostly just fine from my first draft. Although I did have a subplot that I ended up completely rewriting where Jovis was like infiltrating the palace as like a spy kind of thing, and I was like, this is taking too long. So it's like, no, he's got to be going there like right before like the whole riot happens. So yeah, that's that. I don't even know where I trashed it at this point. It's trashed somewhere.
Do you not keep a junk file of some sort?
I do, but it's mostly so I don't feel like I'm trashing it forever, even though I kind of really am because I never go back to it.
Yeah, we rarely resurrect anything from that, but it feels better just to have it there in case we need it for some reason.
Like,
every so often, like one line. It's like, okay, in this completely different scene, that line of dialogue there that was good, we could use that again, but mostly it's just dead and gone. With the second book, I ended up rewriting like a third of it, so there's a lot there. I can't really tell you about that, but we also had to rewrite more of our third book or our second book than of the first.
Second books are hard. They are
second books are hard.
Yeah.
Let's see. How can we
like
use I was just how can we use real cultures for inspiration while remaining respectful to the real life people and culture? I'm just going to say right off the bat, this is a complex question we are not going to be able to give sufficient justice to, though we can still give short answers. Somebody else.
You guys go. Oh yeah,
not it.
Well, I know I have heard this. I have heard this sometimes broken apart as appropriation versus appreciation, and I think that even the appreciation side of things you need to be careful about, because there's dangers there of kind of either lionizing a culture in a particular way along particular stereotypes. And I think it ultimately comes down to questions around or being aware of who's being given a voice and who are you speaking for? Who is profiting off of this? And is the group that is that you're borrowing from, have they been exploited along these lines or along different lines? In such a way that you're participating in something that's been going on, an exploitation that's been going on for a while. And I feel like in anthropology, one of the things that was coming into vogue as Marie and I were coming up through anthropology was the idea of anthropology as a conversation, a collaboration, and a way of lifting up and creating a space for the voices of the people that you were working with and the communities they were working with, and doing your work in a way that was not just respectful, but actually involved them and answered their concerns. And
more of a partnership.
More of a partnership, and a partnership that was beneficial to them in ways that they had asked to be benefited. And I think kind of keeping those things in mind in any project that you do. Again, it's complicated. Yeah. Writing the other is a good place to go and start thinking about these conversations.
Yeah.
Thank you, Brian.
So my trilogy is Asian inspired, and I'm Chinese, so I kind of took the easy way out. that respect. Although, like, I do have some work that I've been working on that is inspired by other cultures. I think that it is really important to avoid stereotypes and make sure that, you know, your people are all coming across as real people.
Yeah.
Because I think in any culture, you know, people are complicated. And I think avoiding painting them with a broad brush is very important. But yeah, I think there's a lot to consider. There is a lot.
Yeah. And I would just say as well that, like, there's a difference when you're talking about using another culture as inspiration. Are you writing something that is clearly going to be an analog of a real world culture in kind of its full complexity, versus there's a particular aspect of it that you're taking inspiration from, but it's going into a society that is not that entire tapestry? And there's kind of different answers to that. Like, the more that you are writing something that is a clear analog, the more important it is to do really kind of comprehensive research, that you don't just read about a few details, but you read about the whole panoply of it as much as you can, as opposed to if you're taking an aspect like, if you wanted to write about a society with a caste system, then you'll want to read up on, like, say, you know, the caste system that used to exist in India, which still has some effects today. But then if you're not writing about that society, then take it and rework it and rethink, what is the basis of the caste system in your society? Would it be along the same lines? What would be the names that they have for the different things? So that it doesn't look like you just grabbed that one piece and, like, shoved it in without thinking about how it works. And, you know, make it kind of something that fits into the society that you're talking about. Those are different processes depending on what end result you're aiming for.
Oh, another thing just to add, I think it would be very important to have a sensitivity reader.
Yes.
Definitely make sure that you have somebody from that culture taking a look at it, just so you can avoid any kind of common pitfalls that you may not be aware of. I think that's definitely something you'd want to do.
And I think understanding, and this is another kind of stealing this from anthropology, that all cultural practices and beliefs and everything are drawn from are sensible and rational reactions and answers to and behaviors drawn from the history and geography that culture exists in. And so whenever you are borrowing, like, say you're doing your own version of a caste system, knowing what your culture's history and geography is and how that would change how you're creating your caste system is important. And I'm thinking about, it often gets brought up in a couple interviews, it's been brought up, the television show Bright, or the TV movie Bright, which did that horribly, because it had this like, we're going to have this, like, you know, orcs and elves and everything in modern day society, but it completely ignored the entire, like, 1,000 years of history. And the, you know, it was like our society, but with orcs and elves, without really thinking about what the consequences of all of that would be in our society. So
I just popped an answer into chat for a question about our release date, because that's not a long thing. November. There you go. Let's see. Give me 1 second.
Oh, I think I have the next. Is this the next one?
Go ahead.
Oh, for both, did you envision these series as multiple books from the beginning? If not, when did you know you had more a story than just one book? I think we've kind of both answered that through the course of the questions.
Definitely ours was, it was meant to be a trilogy from the start. You know, we've already mentioned Tricot enough that I think it won't be a spoiler to say that the number 3 winds up having relevance repeatedly in the story.
Well, if you've read my book, then you know that the way that it ends, it's pretty obviously, like, I mean, the plot, you know, draws to a close from the first book, but there's definitely, you know, more story to be told. And then also, like, when we were taking it out on submission to publishers, we were taking it as a trilogy. So I did go ahead and, like, you know, write up little things for, you know, what happens in book 2 and book 3.
And little glimpse of how the sausage gets made. We did have a conversation about how it was very important to us to, if at all possible, sell the trilogy, because sometimes what happens is an author sells the first book and the publisher will pick up the later ones if the first book does well enough. And we really wanted to make sure that we were going to have the ability to tell the whole story, because again, like you said, Andrea, our first book does resolve the conflict that was kind of the central thing there. Like a big thing happens and it gets dealt with. But that whole thing of there's an arc and a trajectory that we had in mind, that is not finished at the end of the first book. And we would have felt really, really disappointed. That's a mild word for it. If we got cut off and couldn't finish that. So, and this, by the way, just as a PSA, is one of the reasons why that tactic of, oh, well, this new series has started, but I don't want to buy it until the series is done. If the author hasn't sold the entire series, but only the beginning of it, it may never be done if the sales on the first book aren't good enough. So yeah.
I can speak for myself, but I'm pretty sure I speak for you as well, that we finish our books. So
yes. We are like, if somebody was commenting that it's so fast that our book's coming out in November, you will not be left waiting for a decade for the conclusion of our series, unless we like both get hit by buses somehow, which hopefully won't happen.
Yeah, my structural edits are almost done, and I've already started outlining book 3. So also,
so have we. Yep. Because we want y'all to get it so that we can watch you react to it. Waiting's no fun for us either. Okay, let's see. Question for Andrea, though I think Alyssa also has thoughts of this. I've noticed a rise in popularity in Chinese fiction lately, especially the wuxia and xianxia genres, with a specific interest in LGBT content. The rise of the C novel on the internet. I'm not going to attempt to pronounce all of those in one go. Do you think that the American market...
Modazushi is in there because I saw it earlier. And I think Erha is in there as well. So yeah.
Yeah. Do you think that the American market will capitalize on this interest? I think readers are hungry for fantasy that doesn't fall so handily into Western tropes.
I have to say, I hope so. I noticed that with Netflix and everything, where they're picking up foreign shows like The Untamed, I know is very popular right now. And I have heard there is a fan translation of the books somewhere, because I think it's not been officially translated. But yeah, I think there's a huge market for it, and I really hope that we see more of it. I can't speak to whether or not we will, but I definitely think that people are interested, and I personally hope that we do see more of that.
And I think for me, this interestingly kind of goes back to the appropriation appreciation. I can't speak all of a sudden, because I have read all 3 of Mo Shang-Tong-Shu's fan translations, and she's the one who wrote Modazushi, which is the Untamed, and I've read a bunch of others, and I've purchased on the Chinese websites. I purchased Chinese versions of the novels and chapters where they're available and everything to get money back to the authors. And I even talked to Marie about, ideas that I was interested in. I'm like, God, I would love to write this, but I don't feel that I can and should, because the way I should be using whatever kind of cloud or platform I have is to really encourage people to pick up these novels and to watch the adaptations, and to demand as much as possible that we do get English translations of these things, because oh my God, I would kill for an English language translation of Heaven Official's Blessing, which is Tianguan Cifu, which is the same author who wrote The Untamed, Modazushi. I would love to see official translations of these. Unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to do that. But yeah.
And I selfishly want the official translations as well, because Alyssa keeps telling me about these things that they're reading, and I run into the problem that because they're fan translations, they're not the super polished professional books that you can get in a store, and at this point, I've hit a point where I can't like get past the awkwardness of the translation very easily to enjoy the story. So I'm much happier watching like the TV shows where I get to see the visuals and everything. And even if the subtitles are a little bit clumsy, I've still got enough other stuff going on. And also, frankly, like half these web novels, I see friends posting about, oh, I'm on chapter 750 of this one.
I was going to say, I think that's actually honestly one of the places that you'll see the most kind of challenge is we've had people comment on how big our book is at 200,000 words and 600 pages, and like when you're looking at these web novels, like they're 500,000 words, 600, 750,000 words.
You would have to break them up into series,
and I think that is one of the places where you'd probably get like people just not. There's a different reading expectation and everything like that, which is too bad because they're really good.
Yeah. No, you'd have to do them as a more, serialized series kind of thing, I think. And the challenge there would be, okay, is the story structured in a way that you can find good breakpoints, or would it just be sort of arbitrarily? And actually, speaking of kind of arbitrary breakpoints, I have been reading an officially published translation of what in English usually gets called Legend of the Condor Heroes. And the divisions between the volumes as they're being put out are pretty much just like there. That there's not a feeling of, all right, this volume has come to a conclusion because it was written as one ongoing story. And so it's kind of like the publisher went, well, this will make roughly equal numbers of pages if we chop it here. It's not structured to be, an arc within each volume.
Now, I will say, interestingly, there's an American version of The Three-Body Problem, I think, that is being made. There's also a Chinese version, and I'm actually more interested to see the Chinese version because I think that they're going to, I don't know how you can make that novel into an effective television show or series, but I feel like a Chinese version is going to do it better justice.
All right. Let's see. Okay. Next question that is for me and Alyssa. We'll try to keep our answer to this brief. Saying, I know you both have novels you wrote by yourselves, so how does it differ working as a duo? Do you prefer it? What aspects are your most and least favorite? We've already talked about the working process, but the things that I will say, I don't know that I would say that I prefer one or the other because both are fun. What makes the collaboration cool is getting both that instant feedback of like, I say tag, and then I get to see Alyssa react to what I wrote, which, writers were often waiting a really long time for anybody else to read what we've done. And so that's a lot of fun. And then just like the kind of gestalt energy that'll happen when we get on a roll with some idea, or when we get stuck and we're just like, I don't know how to make this go. Like, here, you fix it. You find a way to do that.
Although I will say there are sometimes where like we'll be doing something difficult and Marie will be like, she'll toss it to me and I'll look at what she's done. I'll be like, I don't know how to answer that. Why do you give this to me now? But then, I come up with something.
Yeah. Or just, plot problems where it's like, okay, we need to figure out how to handle this thing. And it can help to have somebody else who is, sufficiently involved to answer that question for you. I don't know if that there's a least favorite aspect to it other than just it's writing a book together does not mean each of you does 50% as much work as you would on your own. That is not how the math goes. You do maybe 80% the work you would do on your own. So it adds up to a lot.
But you'll have somebody where you might be, an answer you might have on your own, the other person will be like, well, yeah, but that's not good enough. Or we could do like pushing you harder and you're like, So there's that frustration, but also I think fun.
Yeah. For Andrea, what inspired Mephi? This is another one that I want an answer to too. We get to have our questions answered as well.
I don't know. I really, I really wanted to write a book with an animal companion because I've enjoyed them so much in the past. And I think I wanted like somebody that was kind of like fun and mischievous. A lot of people have asked me if my cat Mochi inspired him, which is hilarious because they actually do have like a lot of very similar personality traits. However, I actually got Mochi like after I wrote Mephi. So,
So instead of it
yeah.
being the owner and the pet start to look like each other, it's the pet starts to look like the character.
Yeah, something like that. But yeah, so I can't say that anything in particular inspired him. I think mostly, I mean, definitely like cats did, like otters did, just like the little cute, little mischievous things. And then I also like, he's got a bit of heart and soul too. So yeah.
Meffy's adorable.
Meffy is adorable.
He's fun. I'm
Not
excited to share his, like, because he gets older, throughout the book. So he's a little bit of a teenager in book 2. So it's a little bit fun.
Another one for Andrea. What gave you the inspiration for your magic system?
Oh, I think I answered that already. I was at a food court and my friend Marina Losbetter, who's actually like another author. Her books are great. Almost choked on that piece of bone. So I keep telling her that it was in Texas, the San Antonio WorldCon. So it was a long time ago. And she got like Chinese food at a food court, which I'm like, Chinese food at a food court in San Antonio, Texas, probably not the best place to get Chinese food. So
having grown up in Dallas, I can attest. It's better now than it was when I was a kid.
I keep telling her I owe her like good Chinese food. I'm like, I'll make you some sometime that you won't be choking on bone.
Yeah. And then, are there any courses you took or groups you joined that you feel helped you learn and grow as an author? Are there any unexpected ones? I already mentioned the fact that Alyssa and I are both, coming from an anthropology and folklore background, and that's honestly probably the biggest part of it for me. Is that, like, I didn't take creative writing courses or things like that. Instead, all the courses I was taking were kind of a fire hose of story ideas into my head, which I think in the long run probably did me more good.
Okay. So any courses? I didn't take any courses, so I didn't study creative writing. I actually studied economics. So
Nice.
yeah, which I don't actually use that much in my writing. But groups I joined. So I used to live in Sacramento, and I actually would joke with people, but it really wasn't a joke, that I had joined like every writing group available in the area. Which it's actually not a joke. I actually had. And I just find like getting all of those perspectives to be very, very helpful. And in addition, I did so much critiquing. I mean, I still do. And I think that is one of the best ways to learn how to write, because you read something and you're like, well, this isn't working for me, but I can't figure out why. And then part of that is like learning how to figure out like why it's not working for you and how to articulate that, because once you do, it's easier to spot that in your own work.
And it can be easier to see those things when it's not your own, because you're not bringing with you all the baggage of it. Well, but I know what, that like, stuff where it's, okay, this wasn't communicated sufficiently to the reader, or like, well, you may know all these other facts that cause this to make sense, but since that's not available to the reader, it looks completely like it's out of left field or whatever.
Yeah. So I would definitely say just joining writing groups and critiquing a lot of work is super helpful.
And frankly, because I've heard lots of people talk about joining critique groups where the critiques they received weren't all that useful. And that's why I think, honestly, it's easier to look at what you can learn from critiquing. Rather than being critiqued, because your group might or might not actually give you a lot of great feedback. But if you're working on honing your own eye, then eventually you can turn that on your own fiction and get much better results out of it. Would any of you, we're almost at the end here. Yeah. Would any of you consider coming to the Texas Book Festival, one of the largest, if not the largest book festival in the U.S.? And if you do, can I claim credit with the organization to boost my volunteer street cred?
I mean, as soon as we can travel, yes.
Yeah, I'm like, yes, when COVID is over.
Yeah,
and going everywhere.
Since I mentioned it earlier, I've got the cred of, I'm a Texan, Like, I was born in Dallas, lived there until I went to college. So the fact that I I've read at a bookstore in Houston a couple of times, and that's basically the only event I've ever done in Texas, which is kind of embarrassing when I think about it. So yes, I would love to go to the Texas Book Festival. And our final question, which is shamelessly pandering to the M.A. Carrick part of this. I love Tess. Is there any chance a future book has more growth of her story and future?
Yes.
Yeah. And we're done. I mean, come on. Tess is basically Alyssa's self-insert character. Of course there's going to be more with her.
We have one more to wrap up with. Something you read, watched, or listened to lately that you loved.
Actually, because I was reading this in advance of the event that Alyssa and I did on Tuesday, I was reading To Sleep in a Sea of Stars, Christopher Paolini's book that came out in, I think, September. And that was actually really excellent. I mean, it's also a brick of a book. I'm not sure how big because it was an ebook, but probably comparable in size to our book, and I think I hoovered it up in 3 days or something. So I stayed up later than I should have, even allowing for the fact that I go to bed at 3 a.m. normally. So yeah, it starts off looking a lot like Alien. It is not attempting to pretend that that's not an influence, but it takes that starting point and goes in some very interesting directions that I liked a lot.
So agreed, because I've been reading that. I'm going to actually say something that I am looking forward to, because I've been looking forward to this for a while, which is Isabel Yap is a Filipina writer who I'm not a huge short fiction reader. I love her short fiction. She is just, her language is so evocative, and her kind of perspective is so beautiful and interesting. And she's got a book of short fiction, I believe it's short fiction, called Never Have I Ever, coming out in beginning of February, I think. I'm really looking forward to that. I can't wait to get my hands on it. It just sounds beautiful, and I love her stuff.
The cover is amazing too. Every time I pull the cover, I'm like,
yeah. So yeah, Isabel Yap.
So for me, I'm partially through Cobra Kai right now.
We just started watching that. My household started watching that the other night.
And I'm having a blast. It is extremely cheesy, but very funny. And it's definitely not taking itself seriously. The vast majority of the actors in it are intensely mediocre, but they're having a grand time, and I love it. So that's been my thing that I've been watching lately. So.
And we are out of questions. So thank you all for all the really excellent questions. Lots of meat to chew on there.
Thank you for coming. Really appreciate it.
And for being patient with our slow technical difficulties start.
Yes. But we made up for it.
Yes. Yes, we did.